I waited for his apology. He waited for my love. And maybe that's why I found myself here again, leaning against the chipped counter of a tiny, dimly lit bookstore, watching her slide her fingers over the spines of old novels like she owned the worlds inside them. I always feel off balance around her. Part of me wants to retreat, tuck myself behind the nearest shelf, pretend I don't notice how the corners of her mouth twitch when she reads something she likes. Another part of me wants to reach across the narrow aisle and touch her hand, just once, to see if it's warm like I imagine it is. But I don't. I never do. She's standing there, wearing that soft, faded cardigan she always seems to favor, the one that makes her look like she's been built from comfort and quiet confidence. Her hair is streaked with silver in the right places, not enough to age her, but enough to make her presence feel grounded. I watch her tuck a loose strand behind her ear and try not to think about how that movement lingers, like she's aware of someone's gaze, even if I'm careful to stay out of it. I came here to kill time, but really I came here to see her. I tell myself it's about the books, the smell of old pages, the faint hum of the heater in the corner. But the truth is, my evenings have been quietly rearranged around her without me noticing until now. Are you looking for anything in particular? Her voice cuts through my internal spiral like a soft bell. It's steady, confident, but there's a tiny crack of curiosity that always catches me off guard. No, just browsing, I say, fumbling for something to hold, pretending my fingers need a book as much as I need an excuse to stay here. She smiles, small, knowing, like she understands the pretense, and I feel a pang of guilt for being so transparent without a word leaving my mouth. She moves closer to the shelf beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. There's a silence that stretches just a beat too long, where I feel the faint heat of her presence without really wanting it, but also without wanting it to end. My chest tightens, and I think maybe she feels it too, because she doesn't move away. Instead, she picks up a book and tilts it toward me, her eyes meeting mine just long enough for a shiver to run down my spine. "Thought you might like this," she says. It's casual, almost dismissive, but the gesture carries a weight I can't explain. And I know she notices the way my fingers brush hers when I take it. Just a fleeting contact, but it lingers in my thoughts long after I've returned it to the counter. I try to distract myself, focusing on the title in my hands, but the words blur. My attention is tangled in the line of her jaw, the way her eyes dart away and then back, the faintest upturn at the corners of her mouth that could be amusement, or patience, or something else entirely. When she finally moves away to the next aisle, I catch myself holding my breath until she's out of sight. And then I realize I've been thinking about that small act, her hand brushing mine, the quiet way she let it happen, the pause that felt like an invitation without being one. I lean against the counter again, book forgotten, and wonder if she knows how that single, fleeting moment has taken over the rest of my evening. I wonder if she notices me noticing her. And I wonder if, somehow, she is waiting too. For an apology, for a word, for something unspoken between us. And I can't stop thinking about it. I found her in the back room of the bookstore, crouched by a low shelf that had somehow collapsed, sending a small avalanche of paperbacks onto the floor. She looked up at me, caught mid-breath, and I could see the faint crease of frustration across her forehead. You need some help?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart had already sped up. She hesitated, tugging a strand of hair behind her ear the way she always does when she's uncomfortable. Her eyes flicked toward mine, then quickly away, scanning the mess as if it were a problem she could solve alone. I guess," she said finally, her voice just above a whisper. There was a tightness in it, a subtle fragility she tried to mask with a small, dry smile. I crouched beside her, reaching for a stack of books. Our hands brushed, briefly, accidentally, but long enough for my pulse to spike. She flinched almost imperceptibly, and I noticed how tired she looked, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped slightly despite the confident posture she carried in public. "You do this a lot?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Too often," she admitted. Then, after a pause, she added softly, "People don't really notice, you know. Or they just assume I can handle it." There it was, the crack in her armor. I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the small, dusty room, my eyes following the gentle curve of her fingers as she arranged the fallen books. The way she lingered over each spine, the faint tremor in her hands. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I saw it all. "You shouldn't have to do it alone," I said finally, handing her a paperback. She took it with a slight nod, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, they lingered on the floor, on the scattered books, on something I couldn't see. I wanted to say more, to tell her I noticed everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let my presence speak. A steady silence, the quiet patience of someone willing to be here, even if she didn't want me to. She straightened a little, brushing off her hands. "Thanks," she murmured, almost lost to the noise of the room. The word was light, but it carried an almost imperceptible weight, like she was admitting she needed help, even if she would never say it outright. As we stood there, the air between us thickened in a way I couldn't name. I wanted to reach out, to offer some small reassurance, some bridge across the distance she kept so carefully. But I didn't. I could only watch, quiet, my chest tight with something I wasn't ready to define. Then she looked up, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes met. It was nothing, almost nothing, a soft, searching glance, but it held a charge I couldn't ignore. My fingers itched, my whole body hummed with the gentle pull of something forbidden, something she didn't have to acknowledge, but I couldn't stop feeling. And then she turned away, reaching for another stack of books, leaving me with the memory of that look, the brush of her hands, the quiet weight of her fatigue, and a tension that wouldn't let go. I stayed where I was, pretending to pick up books, but my mind was already replaying the moment, over and over, wondering if she felt it too. The rain had started softly at first, drumming against the windows of the tiny cafe where we had somehow ended up after hours of shelving and sorting books. I sat across from her, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug of coffee, watching the faint tremor in her fingers as she stirred sugar into her own cup. I can't believe you stayed this late," she said, voice low, almost reluctant to break the quiet. She glanced at the clock above the counter, then back at me, as if measuring how much of herself she could let out without tipping the balance. I shrugged, pretending casualness, though my chest was tight. "I didn't want to leave you alone with all that mess," I said. Truthfully, I stayed because I wanted to be near her. The air between us was electric, charged with something unspoken, something neither of us had the courage, or maybe the right, to name. Her laugh was soft, almost hesitant, but it caught me off guard. It was the kind of laugh that could fill a room, but she kept it contained, as if she didn't trust anyone with it. I noticed the way her eyes lingered on mine a fraction too long, and my stomach flipped in a way I hadn't expected. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She hesitated, thumb hovering, before she glanced at the screen. I saw her expression tighten, just for a moment, the way someone might when an old acquaintance reappears uninvited. A text from her ex, maybe, or a reminder of something she hadn't finished dealing with. I should," she started, then stopped, biting her lip. I didn't move. I wanted to reach across, to say something, anything, to anchor her, but I stayed still. My hands itched, but I restrained myself, because I knew that one wrong move could undo the fragile balance we'd managed to hold all evening. Instead, I watched the little things, how her hair caught the lamplight, how her shoulder rose slightly with each sigh, how her lips pressed together when she was deciding what to do. She looked like she carried worlds on her back, and I wanted, more than I'd admit, to take even a fraction of it for her. She set the phone down finally, a silent decision. "I don't know," she whispered. Her voice was a fragile thing, and I wanted to answer it with more than words. I leaned slightly closer, almost imperceptibly, drawn to the quiet vulnerability she was showing for the first time. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee, and the world outside faded to a blur of water and neon reflections. I could feel the proximity, the subtle warmth radiating from her arm inches from mine, the faint brush of our knees under the table. Everything in me wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to let her know she wasn't alone. But I didn't. I held myself back, biting the inside of my cheek until the tension knotted and twisted inside me. She looked up again, meeting my gaze for a heartbeat that felt like a lifetime. There was an almost admission in her eyes, something neither of us had the courage to speak. And for a single, suspended second, I leaned forward, drawn toward the impossible. But the door of the cafe creaked open, and the spell broke. A stranger stepped in, wet from the rain, and suddenly we were just two people, sitting across from each other, coffee cooling in our hands, the moment slipping through our fingers like water. I stayed leaning slightly forward, heart hammering, and watched her glance away, wishing, quietly, that I hadn't. We were alone in the bookstore again, the overhead lights dimmed for the evening, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and polish. I had been stacking returned books for the better part of an hour, but I couldn't stop stealing glances at her as she leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. She cleared her throat, a small sound, almost swallowed by the quiet, but it made me freeze mid-movement. "What are we doing?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost broken, but it carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I dropped the book I was holding, the thud echoing in the empty room. I didn't answer at first. I couldn't. Because there was no easy answer, not when the air between us had shifted so subtly, so irreversibly, over countless small touches and stolen looks. "I mean," she hesitated, running her fingers along the edge of the counter. "I know we see each other a lot. I know we talk. And then there's this." Her hand gestured vaguely toward the space between us, the unspoken tension, the electricity neither of us could name. I swallowed. The lump in my throat made my tongue heavy. I don't know," I admitted finally, voice low. Too low, maybe, but honest. My eyes stayed on hers, tracing the fine lines around them, the slight downturn of her mouth, the way her hair fell into her eyes. She let out a breath I couldn't place. Relief? Frustration? Something else entirely. "We can't just pretend anymore," she said. The words hit me like a sudden draft, cold and undeniable. This, whatever it is, it's not normal. And I don't know if it's fair. I felt a pang of guilt, of longing, of something I didn't even have a name for. I wanted to say, I know. I wanted to reach out and let her feel that, let her know that I was just as lost, just as caught in the pull she refused to name. But I didn't move. My hands were frozen on the counter. We stood like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Her eyes didn't leave mine, and I could see the fatigue, the vulnerability, the question she didn't dare finish. The silence between us was louder than any words could be, full of restraint, full of unspoken confessions. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she whispered finally, almost to herself. Her voice trembled slightly, and my chest tightened. She wasn't talking about me, not entirely, but the weight of it pressed against us both. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I would take whatever risk came with standing beside her. I wanted to tell her that I was already halfway there, caught, tangled, hopelessly invested. But the words caught in my throat, unsaid, leaving the space between us thick with more than just tension. She shifted, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, and for a moment I thought she might say more. Might reach out. Might break the fragile barrier we had been maintaining. But then her eyes fell, and she whispered, almost inaudibly, "I don't even know if I want to be the person who lets this happen." And in that single line, the quiet devastation, the longing, the fear, all of it hung in the air. I felt it settle over me, heavy, inescapable. I didn't move. I couldn't. I found her sitting on the edge of the worn armchair in the corner of the bookstore, a letter in her hand. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, the handwriting familiar, curling in a way that made my chest tighten without reason. She didn't look up when I entered. Her shoulders were hunched, a quiet weight pressing down, and the faint tremor in her hands caught my attention immediately. I wanted to back away, give her space, but something held me in place. "It's sold," she said finally, voice soft, barely audible over the hum of the heater. "I found it in a drawer at home. I wasn't ready to read it until now." I didn't ask whose it was. I didn't need to. The pause, the way her fingers lingered on the paper, the faint hitch in her breath, it told me everything. "It's from him," she whispered. from someone I thought I'd never get over. Her eyes flicked toward mine for a second, and I caught a glimpse of something raw there. Regret, longing, a sadness she usually buried under layers of composure. I swallowed, unsure whether to speak or just let her hold on to it. Finally, I sat on the floor beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Do you want to read it?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her fingers unfolded the paper, and as she read, her lips pressed together, her eyes distant. I noticed the subtle quiver in her jaw, the way her thumb traced the words as if she could memorize them through touch alone. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glossy, but not with tears. With memory. I didn't realize how much I buried that," she said. Her voice wavered, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her confidence, the layers she kept so carefully in place. "I didn't know you lost someone like that," I said softly, almost to myself. I reached out, tentatively, my fingers brushing the edge of her hand, just a whisper of contact. She didn't pull away, just let it rest there, fragile and fleeting. "I did," she admitted. "And I still think about him sometimes. I thought I was done, that I had moved on." But she trailed off, looking down at the letter, then back at me, the vulnerability between us sharp and unguarded. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't know whether to speak, to offer comfort, or to just stay silent. Her walls, usually so solid, were trembling, and I was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time in a way that made everything I thought I knew about myself uncertain. You didn't ruin anything," I said finally, words soft, almost unnecessary. "You just survived. That's all anyone can do." Her gaze lingered on mine, searching, hesitant, as if she were weighing whether to let me in further. I could feel the tension in the room shift, something subtle, seismic, unspoken. The letter, the confession, the quiet acknowledgement of past pain had changed the energy between us. She let out a small, shuddering breath, and for the first time, I sensed that maybe she needed someone, not to fix, not to rescue, but just to sit with her in the space of everything she couldn't say aloud. I didn't move. I stayed beside her, fingers brushing hers again, a simple, electric reminder that I was here. And she didn't pull away. For a moment, the world felt suspended, fragile, and full of possibilities that neither of us dared name yet. The bookstore was quieter than usual that evening, the hum of the heater filling the empty spaces between us. She was seated on the armchair, the letter still resting in her lap, and I stood near the counter, pretending to organize books but stealing glances at her anyway. She looked up at me, catching my eye, and for the first time, the weight between us didn't feel fragile. It felt inevitable. There was no rush, no need to define it with words that might shatter what had been carefully building between us. I don't know how this happens," she said quietly, almost to herself, tracing the edge of the letter. "I thought I had my life figured out. I thought I could keep it separate." I stepped closer, slowly, carefully. "Maybe some things aren't meant to be separate," I said softly, letting the words hang without pressure, letting her decide what they meant. She didn't answer. She just tilted her head, eyes meeting mine, and in that long, steady gaze, I felt everything we hadn't said pass between us. The late nights, the shared silences, the almost moments that never quite became something else. All of it threaded into this single, suspended understanding. I crouched beside her chair, careful not to invade her space, but close enough that our knees brushed lightly. The contact was subtle, fleeting, but electric. Her hand shifted slightly, and without thinking, I let my fingers graze hers. She didn't pull away. She let it rest there, tentative, fragile, yet full of unspoken agreement. The letter had lost its weight. Its confession, its past, mattered, but it was no longer a barrier. She exhaled softly, the tension in her shoulders melting a little. I mirrored her, letting myself relax into the quiet of the room. For the first time, I didn't want to rush anything. I didn't want a grand declaration or a sudden shift. I just wanted this. Her presence, the way our fingers brushed, the shared acknowledgement that we were finally, quietly, aligned in some fragile, human way. "You're hard to read," she said finally, with a small, almost embarrassed smile. And maybe I don't want to read you fully, not yet. I chuckled softly, the sound low in the quiet room. I don't think I'd want you to, I admitted. And in that moment, it felt like the truth, messy, imperfect, but ours. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the windows streaked with silver reflections of streetlights. We sat together, side by side, hands barely touching, breathing the same quiet air. Nothing was declared. Nothing had changed dramatically. And yet everything had shifted. I leaned my forehead just slightly against hers, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that carried a weight neither of us tried to name. She stayed, eyes closed, letting the contact linger. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel restless, didn't feel the ache of longing or the sharp pang of what-ifs. We simply existed, together, and that was enough. The world outside continued without notice. The bookstore smelled faintly of paper and polish. And for now, that quiet, unspoken closeness, earned, patient, and entirely ours, was enough. No words were necessary. We simply stayed there, hands touching lightly, foreheads leaning, and the moment ended quietly, perfectly, without fuss or fanfare. Looking back now, months later, it almost feels like a dream. I walk past that same little bookstore sometimes, and I catch myself scanning for her, half expecting to see her fingers grazing a shelf, the soft crease of her smile, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking. I've changed. I notice things I used to overlook. The pause before a laugh, the way someone hesitates before touching a door handle, the quiet moments that carry more meaning than any shouted confession ever could. I've learned patience, restraint, and the strange, delicate weight of waiting for someone to meet you halfway without forcing them. And she's changed too. She carries less of the carefully layered armor she used to wear. There's softness now, not fragility, but a trust that wasn't there before. I see her in ways I never could before, not just the confident, composed exterior, but the moments that make her human, complex, and achingly beautiful. Love, I've realized, doesn't always arrive in fireworks or sweeping gestures. Sometimes, it's the slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of moments, the hand hovering over yours, the shared silence in a room too quiet, the small kindnesses that signal, without words, that someone chooses you again and again. We didn't need grand declarations. We didn't need the world to see or approve. We just needed to exist in the same space, letting the unspoken weight between us become a bridge rather than a barrier. That's what made it ours. Earned, delicate, real. Sometimes I still catch myself replaying the early days. The letters, the small touches, the stolen glances. And each time, I feel the quiet thrill of recognition, that slow, impossible pull that eventually became something undeniable. We learned to listen without speaking, to hold without claiming, to be patient without yielding to fear. And maybe that's the real lesson, that love isn't always about finding the perfect words, but about finding the perfect way to simply exist with someone, to witness them, and to be witnessed in return. And as I sit here, reflecting on everything that led us here, I feel a warmth I can't quite describe, a soft glow that lingers even when the bookstore is empty and the streets are quiet. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?